Graceland. To the outside world, it was the ultimate dream. Elvis Presley's kingdom. A palace where fame lived and legends were born. But in Sofia Coppola's Priscilla, that dream crumbles before our eyes. The mansion doesn't gleam with music or laughter. Instead, it looms cold, cavernous, and quiet. A gilded cage, hiding the silent unraveling of a girl who stepped into its halls at 14. From the very first moment, Coppola makes a choice that shocks the audience. There is no Elvis music. Not a single iconic song carries the story forward. No Love Me Tender. No Jailhouse Rock. The silence is deliberate. It strips away the myth of Elvis and leaves us face to face with something the world rarely dared to ask. What was it like to live in the king's shadow? The answer comes through Priscilla's eyes alone. Coppola refuses to let the camera drift into Elvis's world of concerts, fans, and flashing lights. Instead, we are pulled into long, lingering shots of stillness, a girl staring out of windows, waiting by telephones, pacing through endless rooms. Where the world saw a superstar, she saw absences. Where the tabloids printed fairy tales, she lived through loneliness. This is not a story about music or stardom. It is about the human cost of proximity to power. Priscilla was just 14 when she first met Elvis in 1959. A child swept into the orbit of a man already worshipped as a legend. What looked like a fantasy quickly reveals itself as something far more unsettling. In Coppola's hands, their romance is not glamorous, but fragile, quiet, and deeply uneasy. The film unfolds like a dream slowly souring into a nightmare. Coppola's muted tones and silences tell us what the dialogue does not. Every lingering hallway, every shadowed corner, becomes a reminder that this story is not about love songs. It is about control, about isolation, and about the invisible weight that pressed down on a young woman's life. But this is not only a story of loss. Hidden in the silence is resilience. Coppola shows us how a girl, once fragile and swallowed whole by Elvis's world, begins to gather the strength to step out of it. The fairy tale dissolves, but in its ruins, we find the quiet power of a woman reclaiming her own identity. Priscilla forces us to confront the truth. Fame is never free. For Elvis, it was glory. For Priscilla, it was sacrifice. And in the end, her greatest triumph was not in being the King Sepet's wife. It was in finding the courage to leave his kingdom behind. Germany, 1959. The world outside is scarred by the echoes of war. American military bases dot the landscape, and it is here, in this unlikely place, that a fairy tale begins. Inside a small diner, bathed in muted light, sits a 14-year-old girl named Priscilla Bielu. She is quiet, shy, almost ghost-like in her presence. The other teenagers laugh and chatter around her, but Priscilla seems caught between worlds, too young for the adult world, too restless for childhood. And then, through the haze of cigarette smoke and jukebox hum, he walks in. Elvis Presley, 24 years old, already a global superstar, already the king of rock and roll. To the world, he is untouchable, a living myth. To Priscilla, in that moment, he is something else entirely, a dream stepping into the room. Coppola does not give us the crash of guitars or the roar of fans. Instead, she makes the moment unsettling in its intimacy. Elvis leans in close, his voice soft, his charisma undeniable. Priscilla's eyes widen, nervous, excited, overwhelmed. He is the most famous man on earth, and yet here he is, speaking to her as if she is the only person in the world. But Coppola layers this moment with unease. 14 and 24, a schoolgirl, and a man already hardened by fame, by war, by women. The film refuses to romanticize the age gap. Instead, it lingers on Priscilla's hesitation, her trembling hands, her darting glances. while Elvis, lonely and homesick, finds comfort in her innocence. For him, she is an escape. For her, he is the fantasy of a lifetime. The tension is not lost on her parents. When Priscilla tells them of Elvis's interest, the family wrestles with disbelief and fear. A man of his age, a figure of his status, pursuing their daughter. Coppola captures their quiet arguments, their uneasy glances. Her father insists on boundaries. Her mother hesitates, but eventually softens, persuaded by Elvis's charm and the immense pressure of the situation. Consent is given. Not freely, not without doubt, but given all the same. And with that, the door to the fairy tale opens. Yet Coppola refuses to let the audience settle into comfort. The cinematography underscores fragility at every step. Long, quiet shots show Priscilla as small, almost swallowed by the spaces around her. School desks that dwarf her, bedrooms that feel too large. The vastness of Elvis's presence pressing down on her even before she enters Graceland. In those early days, everything feels magical. Priscilla is invited into Elvis's circle, surrounded by soldiers, musicians, and friends who seem larger than life. She is dazzled by his attention, intoxicated by his words. He gifts her glimpses of a world no teenage girl could resist, but beneath the glitter, Coppola plants seeds of foreboding. The camera lingers on the silences between their conversations, on Priscilla's nervous smile when Elvis grows moody, on the way her parents' warnings echo faintly in the background, drowned out by her desire to belong to him. The fairy tale glimmers, but it already trembles at its edges. Priscilla herself is framed as fragile, her youth amplified through soft lighting, pale colors, and quiet close-ups. She is not yet the woman the world will later know. She is a girl playing dress-up, stepping into shoes too large for her. And yet, the emotional beat of this chapter is not tragedy. It is the intoxicating beginning. Coppola makes us feel the rush, the allure, the almost unbearable dream of being chosen by Elvis Presley. At 14, Priscilla believes she is walking into a storybook romance. The audience, however, knows better. That duality, the dream versus the dread, defines the opening act. It is magical. Yes, but uneasily so. The camera whispers what words cannot. This is not the fairy tale it seems. By the time the chapter closes, the spell has been cast. Priscilla is no longer just a schoolgirl in Germany. She is now part of Elvis's world, swept up in a fantasy so powerful it will shape the rest of her life. But as the audience watches her wide eyes and hesitant smile, they are left with a gnawing truth. The fairy tale has begun, but it is already cracked. When Priscilla finally arrives at Graceland, the house does not appear as the world imagines it. To fans outside its gates, Graceland is a kingdom, the heart of Elvis's empire, a place of glamour and music. But Coppola's camera tells a different truth. The mansion, though enormous, feels hollow. Its vast rooms echo with silence. Its hallways stretch into shadows. Graceland is not alive with joy. It is suffocating in stillness. This is where the fairy tale begins to fracture. From the moment Priscilla steps through the door, she ceases to be simply herself. Elvis, with his charm and authority, begins shaping her image piece by piece. He tells her how to wear her hair, darker, more dramatic. He instructs her on her clothes, her makeup, even the way she should carry herself. Coppola lingers on the detail. A teenage girl sitting at a vanity mirror, carefully practicing her eyeliner as if rehearsing a role for a play she never auditioned for. Every gesture reinforces the imbalance of power. He is the king, and she must become what he desires. Slowly, her individuality slips away, replaced by the version of Priscilla that Elvis wants the world to see. But the control doesn't stop with appearance. It seeps into her daily life. Priscilla attends school during the day, trying to cling to a semblance of normalcy. but the nights belong entirely to Elvis's world. Waiting, always waiting. Coppola fills the screen with images of Priscilla alone, lying on a bed in silence, walking the long corridors of Graceland with only her footsteps for company, staring out the window at a life she cannot touch. Friends? Freedom? They vanish. She becomes an accessory to his existence, present when he wants her, invisible when he does not. The story fast forwards to 1967. When Elvis and Priscilla marry, to the tabloids, the wedding is dazzling. A union of glamour and legend. Photographs show glittering smiles, champagne toasts, a perfect storybook ending. But Coppola undermines this fantasy with distance. She films the wedding coldly, stripped of intimacy. The camera does not invite us into warmth or romance. It reminds us that what the world saw was an image, not a reality. And then comes motherhood. In 1968, Priscilla gives birth to Lisa Marie Presley. For a brief moment, tenderness breaks through the silence. Coppola allows us to see Priscilla's joy, her vulnerability as a young mother. But even these moments are fleeting. The baby is placed into Priscilla's arms, yet the camera soon drifts back to her solitude. Even motherhood cannot shield her from the loneliness of Graceland. By now, the dream has fully drained of its glitter. What once appeared magical has revealed itself as hollow. The grand house, the glamorous marriage, the title of being Mrs. Presley, all of it is exposed as a carefully constructed illusion. Coppola drains the color, slows the pacing, and fills the silence with waiting. This is the cruel paradox of Graceland. To the outside world, it is paradise. But for Priscilla, it becomes a cage. A place where she is surrounded not by love, but by rules. Where she is admired, not as herself, but as a reflection of someone else's myth. Coppola captures this duality with haunting precision. Every scene inside Graceland is staged to make the viewer feel trapped. The rooms too large, the quiet too loud, the air too heavy. The audience begins to share in Priscilla's suffocation, understanding that beneath the velvet curtains and chandeliers lies a truth more devastating than poverty or obscurity, isolation in the midst of excess. The chapter closes, not with fanfare, but with emptiness. We see Priscilla once again alone, sitting at her vanity, the echo of laughter from a distant party faint in the background. The fairy tale castle has revealed its bars. Graceland is no longer a symbol of Elvis's triumph. It is the cage where Priscilla's youth and freedom quietly disappear. At first, the silence of Graceland felt like loneliness. Now, it begins to feel like tension. Coppola shifts the tone, the stillness remains, but beneath it, something darker starts to stir. Elvis's presence becomes unpredictable. When he is at home, his mood swings define the atmosphere. One moment he is charming, affectionate, the center of gravity in any room. The next, his temper erupts, leaving everyone around him on edge. Coppola does not dramatize these outbursts with loud theatrics. Instead, she shows the fear in Priscilla's eyes, the sudden tightening of her posture, the way silence becomes her only defense. And then, there are the absences. Elvis leaves for tours, for films, for Vegas residencies. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months. Graceland remains the same, cavernous, lonely, but without him. Priscilla is caught in a limbo. She waits, as always, yet the waiting feels heavier now. The phone rings less, the promises grow thinner, rumors seep through the walls. Gossip magazines splash headlines of Elvis and his co-stars, of his affairs with glamorous women on movie sets. Coppola doesn't show us the scandals directly. Instead, she shows Priscilla reading about them, quietly absorbing the betrayal. No shouting, no confrontation, just silence, a look of pain she must bury deep inside. The world outside adores Elvis, while inside, Priscilla's reality fractures piece by piece. The emotional distance grows impossible to ignore. Elvis is there, yet he is not. Even when they share a room, it feels as though a chasm lies between them. He is consumed by his career, his image, his myth. Priscilla is left adrift, trying to hold on to a marriage that feels less like a partnership and more like a performance. In one chilling scene, Coppola portrays Elvis's rage not through spectacle, but through a single violent gesture. A chair thrown across the room, the sound of it hitting the wall, splintering the silence. Priscilla flinches, startled but not shocked. In that moment, the audience understands. Control is no longer subtle. It is physical, sharp, undeniable. But Coppola also begins to weave in Priscilla's quiet awakening. She takes up karate at Elvis's suggestion initially, but it becomes more than a hobby. The film shows her practicing again and again, her movements stiff at first, then sharper, more precise. The repetitive training becomes symbolic. In each strike, in each stance, she builds strength not just of body, but of spirit. This duality defines the cracks. On the surface, she continues to play the role, carefully applying lipstick, maintaining the perfect image, walking in step with the myth. Yet beneath the surface, something begins to shift. In small rebellions, in moments of quiet defiance, Coppola reveals the stirrings of a woman who is no longer content to remain a shadow. The contrast is haunting. Long shots of Priscilla framed in mirrors remind us that her identity has always been dictated by another's gaze. But now, those same mirrors begin to reflect someone different, someone who is slowly recognizing her own reflection, separate from Elvis. The climax of this chapter is not loud. It is not explosive. It is quiet, but devastating. Priscilla looks at Elvis not with admiration, not even with fear, but with realization. The love that once felt like destiny now feels tangled with control, domination, and betrayal. Coppola doesn't give us a single line to explain it. Instead, she lets us sit in the silence of Priscilla's eyes as she understands the truth. This is no fairy tale anymore. The cracks in the dream are wide open. What began in a German diner as a storybook romance has now transformed into something darker. The tension is no longer hidden. It breathes in every room of Graceland, in every absence, in every headline. And Priscilla, though still young, begins to understand the choice before her. She can remain trapped in the king's shadow, or she can begin the quiet, dangerous work of stepping into her own light. By now, the dream has completely collapsed. The girl who once gazed wide-eyed at Elvis across a German diner is gone. In her place stands a woman, weary, bruised by silence, but carrying something new inside her: resolve. Coppola does not build this chapter with shouting matches or fiery confrontations. There are no dramatic courtroom scenes, no screaming tabloids. Instead, she captures the exit the way it truly was: quiet, deliberate, almost unbearably restrained. The power lies in what is not said. The decision comes like a whisper. Priscilla has endured years of absences, affairs, and control. She has given Elvis her youth, her trust, her devotion, but now her strength outweighs her fear. She decides to leave, not as an act of revenge, not as spectacle, but as an act of survival. The scene of packing is one of Coppola's most haunting. We watch Priscilla's hands fold clothes carefully into a suitcase. There is no rush, no panic. The camera lingers on the small movements, the smoothing of fabric, the clicking of a clasp, the steady rhythm of someone who has already said goodbye in her heart. The silence is deafening, yet it speaks louder than words ever could. Her walk through Graceland one final time is filmed with aching distance. The house that once seemed so grand now feels empty, stripped of its illusion. The chandeliers no longer sparkle. The hallways no longer stretch with promise. They hang heavy, oppressive, like the walls of a prison she is finally unlocking. And then comes the drive, perhaps the most powerful image in the film. Priscilla, behind the wheel of her car, pulling away from Graceland. Coppola holds the camera on her face as she drives. No music, no narration, just the sound of the road and the weight of silence. We see fear, yes, but also relief. We see grief, but also liberation. Most of all, we see the beginning of something that was denied to her for so long, her own life. This is not the explosive climax audiences might expect from a Hollywood film, but that is precisely Coppola's point. The power is not in spectacle, it is in restraint. The quiet resolve of a woman who has chosen herself over the myth of a man. The divorce will make headlines. Of course, the world will gossip. The tabloids will spin their tales, but Coppola refuses to give us that noise. She ends Priscilla's story, not with chaos, but with dignity. Elvis remains the king to the world, but Priscilla walks away as something far more profound, a survivor, a woman who chose freedom over fantasy. The tone of this chapter is final, yet it is not bitter. Coppola does not paint Priscilla as vengeful. Instead, she shows her as quietly triumphant. After years of silence, of waiting, of being shaped into someone else's image, she has reclaimed her identity. The fairy tale may have ended, but in its ashes lies something far more valuable. The last image lingers long after the credits roll. Priscilla driving into an uncertain future. The road ahead unknown, but her hands steady on the wheel. It is a simple shot, but it carries an entire lifetime of meaning. For the first time, she is not waiting. She is not controlled. She is not someone else's reflection. She is simply herself. And that, Coppola reminds us, is the quiet revolution at the heart of Priscilla. Not fireworks, not spectacle, but silence. A silence that contains freedom. A silence that contains strength. A silence that tells us, without words, that the girl in the gilded cage has finally broken free. When the credits roll on Sofia Coppola's Priscilla, the silence remains. No triumphant score, no montage of Elvis's greatest hits, no curtain call for the king. Instead, we are left with something more haunting, a young woman's quiet departure, her story finally allowed to breathe. Coppola's vision is radical in its simplicity. By stripping away Elvis's music, she removes the myth that has long overshadowed the truth. For decades, Elvis Presley's story has been told in flashing lights through screams of fans and the echoes of his voice. But in Priscilla, that sound is gone. In its place, we hear the silence of waiting, the rhythm of footsteps in an empty hallway, the muffled hum of a life lived behind closed doors. It is a film that refuses to look away from what fame often conceals. Behind the glitz of celebrity lies a hidden cost, one that is rarely paid by the star alone. In this case, it was paid by a girl whose innocence was consumed in the shadow of a man worshipped by millions. The themes resonate far beyond Graceland. Innocence, devoured by power, isolation hidden behind glamour. The resilience of a woman who endured control and silence only to emerge stronger. These are not just the contours of Priscilla Presley's story. They are the contours of countless women who have lived in the shadows of men the world chose to idolize. What makes Priscilla so powerful is that it does not sensationalize or vilify. Coppola does not turn Elvis into a monster, nor does she turn Priscilla into a martyr. Instead, she presents them as human beings, flawed, fragile, bound together by a relationship that was both intoxicating and suffocating. In that humanity lies the film's truth. Coppola reframes Elvis, not as an untouchable icon, but as a man whose fame and flaws collided in ways that damaged those closest to him. And she reframes Priscilla not as a footnote in his story, but as the center of her own. The camera, for once, is hers. The gaze belongs to her. In the end, Priscilla is not about music or fame at all. It is about silence, the kind of silence that swallows a life whole, and the kind that gives birth to strength when finally broken. Coppola gives us no fireworks, no spectacle, no fairy tale ending. She gives us something far more honest, the image of a woman driving away into her own story, into her own freedom. That is why Priscilla matters. It reminds us that behind every myth, behind every legend, lies a shadowed truth. And sometimes, the most powerful act of defiance is simply to leave. So as you reflect on Coppola's film, ask yourself, what is the cost of a dream, and who pays the price? And if you've seen Priscilla, share your thoughts. Because stories like hers are not just history, they are mirrors, asking us to look closer at the myths we choose to believe and the silences we must never ignore.